I'm joined now by Ron Vitiello, the Senior Advisor to Customs and Border Patrol and former Acting Director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you've been in this job before, or you've been in similar work before, you've been an agent before, now you're advising. And I've seen some of your interviews where you talked about how the Biden administration seems to have been hiding some of the numbers. They seem to have been lying about some of the statistics, lying about the number of people who are coming over and what's happening to them. And we just ended up having a Freedom of Information Act request through the Government Accountability Project that found that neither ICE nor CBP have any information on which illegal immigrants have crossed the border who've actually joined the Selective Service, who've registered for Selective Service in the draft. Now, even with illegal immigrants, that is a felony, something that would make every military-aged male who came over the border a felon. But the Biden administration made no effort at all to enforce this, to record it, to have any data on this. Is this isolated, or is this something that you're coming across over and over again now that you're back after Biden's left?
No, it's clear that during the Biden administration, uncontrolled border was their goal, right? We had an invasion unlike we've ever seen before. And if you just use government numbers, and I know we're all a little bit skeptical of those numbers, but using Biden's own published numbers in public, 11 million encounters by CBP at the immediate border during the 4 years of the Biden administration. That doesn't count the number of people who they abused the parole system to fly into the United States, which weren't seen by law enforcement agents at the line, people who would be responsible for vetting them and making sure they weren't a threat to public safety.
Those are the nighttime flights that were going all over the country?
Right. And then you had, millions probably of gotaways, right? The known gotaways and the unknown gotaways. What does that mean? That means lots of people came to the border and were never seen by law enforcement and are now resident in the United States. And so things like registration, things like turning the CBP One app into the CBP Home app, all of that nonsense that was going on under Biden, those things are now being fixed. We now have CBP Home instead of CBP One. People are required, if they're in the country illegally, to register with the Department of Homeland Security. The Selective Service registration is also a layer that could be put on top of their requirement in the U.S. For what reason? For the reason that if and when they get encountered by immigration officers in the United States, they can be prosecuted not only for being here without being invited, inspected, or within the law, but they can also be charged with these other crimes.
So that gets back to kind of the old Rumsfeld quote. You have the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and the known knowns, and it seems like that the Biden administration was interested in hiding some of those numbers. That lends itself to the idea, and this was something the president pushed, but people are slow to believe it, that this was not something that was simply they didn't have the political willpower, the political capital to enforce the border with their own party. I mean, Biden was the only person who even was on the Democratic primary stage who wanted to keep laws about the border. Everyone else wanted to decriminalize it. But this lends itself to the idea that the administration was actively trying to facilitate illegal crossings. Is that the feeling that you've been getting?
100%. And here's an example. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, was the previous Deputy Secretary under the Obama administration when Joe Biden was the Vice President. And during the 2014 surge, when I was still a government employee, we made recommendations to the Homeland Security Office of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary how to fix the surge that was going on during 2014. They put those recommendations that we gave, myself, Tom Homan, and others, they took those recommendations and put them in place to reduce the number of people that were coming across the border illegally. Those steps worked, and we had better outcomes. Other things happened since, but they knew how to fix it. And Alejandro Mayorkas, as the secretary, watched what happened under the Trump administration, takes over as a secretary, and tears down all the things that were working during the previous 4 years. And so they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew when they took the steps that they took, what exactly was going to happen.
2014, that harkens back to the last time ICE had confirmed a Senate director through the Senate. Every time since 2017, since Obama left office, has been acting. What's the dysfunction that creates, the difficulties and the restraints that puts on the job that you had to deal with in the last administration that maybe have to be dealt with this time around as well?
Well, it shouldn't really matter in government whether you're confirmed or not, but it does. It does when you're talking to appropriations, when you're talking to the Senate oversight committees. If you're a confirmed leader, that matters to them because they've had an opportunity to advise and consent on your position. And then over time, if you don't have someone at that level, it restricts the agency's credibility, capability, and it just depends on what the leadership is. Under Trump 1, and obviously now under Trump 2, if people are acting in their roles, they have the full faith and authority given to them by the president, because we know, as it relates to border security, homeland security, in the DHS space, he's a very enthusiastic supporter of the front line and the leadership as well.
If the Democrats keep this up and they keep up obstruction, which there's no indication that they'll change that, is there any limit to the amount of time that someone can serve in an acting capacity as opposed to a confirmed? Or could someone serve for 4 years?
There are a lot of rules about that. They were written in the aftermath of Obama's midnight recess appointments in 2013 or 14. And so there are restrictions about actors in certain roles, especially in the department, the one I know the most. But there's also ways that, with smart lawyers in the Justice Department and in each of the departments, that you can make things happen when you need to.
Now, the Democrats, I think, aren't the only people who are upset about this sudden change and reversal in the border policy that we've seen over the last 4 years. The cartels, I imagine, are feeling the squeeze. They've got to be taking some shots to their wallet. President Trump, in an interview with Glenn Beck last night for BlazeTV, mentioned that there had been skirmishes along the border. You're a former agent, you're in touch with them. Has there been outbreaks of violence and shooting, and have people been hurt? What's it actually look like down the border where these billions and billions of dollars worth of criminal organizations with weapons are now feeling the squeeze?
Yeah, to set the scene, I don't know exactly about these particular things that the president was referring to. We are on we're constantly reminded of the violence that's perpetrated by cartels in Mexico, sometimes against our front line as well. And so there's 10,000 troops assigned from the Department of Defense alongside the Border Patrol at the line, reinforcing the wall, helping get access to the border, side by side with agents, making sure we're monitoring the border and getting full situational awareness and being able to arrest people as they come across. And so that's something that we have to constantly be vigilant for. And I would just say the Trump effect in Mexico is something I've never seen. They also have 10,000 National Guard troops deployed near the northern border. We are helping them on the military-to-military relationship and helping them understand the capabilities of the cartels as they bring things to the border and as they bring proceeds back into their country. And so there's a really good partnership there that, again, I've never seen Mexico do so much in such a little amount of time. Now, we can't depend on Mexico. We can't outsource these problems for them. But having a willing partner and having somebody in the Oval Office that stands behind, we say we're going to do something and we're going to keep those promises, it's amazing what you can do on the ground.
What do you think's changed in Mexico that it's allowed them to even if they wanted to, there's a state where they're outgunned in some ways by some of the cartels, to what's changed that made their president willing to actually take the risks for retribution and other things that the cartels can do to enforce Trump's border policies and American border policies?
Leadership. A new president, a secretary that understands the political connotations both in the U.S. and in Mexico, and then a willingness at some levels in Mexico to reduce the power, influence, and corruption, the violence that these cartels perpetrate against their citizens. And so you have to have all these things in combination. You have to have a will from the Oval Office that says we're going to fix this problem. We're going to give the front line the tools that they need, and willing partners in places like Mexico leaning in and saying, yeah, we're going to take it on with you because we know you're going to help us.
So if you read the New York Times, you'll come across stories that suggest that the weapons and the machine guns and other rifles and that the cartels are using are being supplied by the United States, by American gun manufacturers, by the Department of Defense. But the middleman seems to be missing from the headlines, which is we're sending those weapons off into the Mexican military, and they're ending up in the hands of cartels, whether through thievery or through corruption. The president said in the interview that they're coming across over and over again these weapons that they can trace back to the U.S. military through the Mexican military. What sort of work are you having to do with the military and these sorts of things? How does that impact trust and the ability to operate down there if our own weapons are being potentially brought to bear against our own men?
Well, we have to understand the capacity of the cartel, the corruption in Mexico, and what these criminal cartels will do to maintain their power base, maintain their business model at the border, within the country, and even in the United States. And so we have to be vigilant about how these weapons get transferred. We have to have a mechanism with the Mexican military to understand when inventory goes missing. But you're only going to have that when you have a leader in the White House that says, I want to help you fix this problem. If you don't fix this problem, there will be consequences. In the case of tariffs or restrictions at the border, restrictions on their movement in the U.S., those kinds of things. And so it's a big problem. The guns in Mexico, proceeds going back to Mexico, is something that we can share with Mexico and do a lot, again, to reduce the capability of these cartels, both in their country and here.
When you see the soldiers south of the border who are charged, and the police who are charged with enforcement, charged with arrest, oftentimes they have to hide their identities because of retribution, because of being followed home, the threats to their family, their wives, their children, their parents. Has this reality yet, this dark reality, entered the United States to the point that you have to take those precautionary methods with our own law enforcement or their own Department of Defense, or is that still a line that the cartels have been unwilling to cross?
It's something that we need to be concerned about, right? They hide their identities in Mexico because they're not only going to be targets for corruption, but they'll be targets for lethal activity, right? They'll threaten, police chiefs and leadership in the military and law enforcement in Mexico. They'll threaten them with killing their family, etc. So hiding their identity is important. We also suffer from corruption in the United States, and it's something that CBP, the front line of DHS, are constantly have to be vigilant against, to making sure that our employees are protected and that the corrupt influence is kept down to the absolute minimum, and then these threats that the cartels, both in the physical operation at the line, but also what you're talking about, influencing people's behavior through force and fear.
Phase one of the administration's plan has been to immediately deploy Coast Guard, deploy military, to deploy fencing, to continue building the wall, to try to bulk up Customs and Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What does phase two, phase three look like? Where's the ramp up from here to make it a problem that's no more?
Yeah, so phase one has been successful, but all of the policy recommendations, all of the policy implementation needs to be backstopped in a number of ways. Authorities that the president is using via executive order need to be backstopped by Congress through legislation. And then resources in phase two are going to be really important. So ICE has embarked on the largest full-scale deportation operation against criminals in the United States than we've seen in my entire lifetime. And so that has to be scaled up. They're doing a really good job, but there's a lot more to do in that space specifically. They need resources to scale up the detention space that they have. Right now, as well as we're doing, we're winning on the border. We're winning even on the ICE operations, but it needs to be scaled up. It needs appropriations for it to scale up. And so phase two looks like sustainability, scaling up these capabilities and maintaining them over the long term.
I've seen numbers floating around between $200 billion and $150 billion, depending on negotiations, of money that's being requested to split between ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And it seems like the Senate is they're less reluctant to give money to Customs and Border Patrol than they are to ICE, maybe because of the negative press they could get from the raids in their own cities. But what difference does it really make to your ability to enforce the border, how that money is diverted between CBP and ICE?
Well, if you want to have a comprehensive fix to what happens at the physical border and how it affects people in the interior of the United States, you have to do both. We're going to take all of the resources that Congress gives us and sustain what's happening now and solidify it. I think ICE is in the same situation. We can't continue to have tens of thousands of illegal gang members in a place like New York or Dallas, Houston, San Francisco, et cetera. That has to be taken on, and that's going to require resources as well. At the end of the day, you've got to do both of those things, because over the long term, that's what's going to secure America and make it safe again.
So the money that is required by CBP in particular, what is that money needed for? Remember, the Biden administration offered in their late legislative push, I think Republicans fell for, to provide funding for beds, to provide funding for more officers, but also there was a lot of other things buried in there, sanctuary policies, et cetera, and it was turned down. But when you feel that lack of resources, you mentioned detainment spaces, you mentioned beds, is it officers, is it weapons, is it technology? Where are these resources needed for phase two?
It's really all of it. I think the most expensive things are the physical operations at the border. So that's people. You got to have enough agents to do the work, infrastructure, access, and barriers at the line, and then the technology that helps minimize the workload on the individual agents so they can cover more ground with the tech that's near and at the wall. And so all of those things. We want enough resources to have full situational awareness at the border. What that means is we know exactly what's going on and where. And then 100% operational control, which means no one gets away from us once we see them cross the border illegally. That's a pretty expensive proposition, but it pays dividends that'll last generations.
During the first Trump administration, there was a lot of talk about how apparently walls don't keep people out. They don't have an impact. People go around them. Those cartels can go under them. They'll go over them. But now that you've come back or on the border specifically, what is the impact that the areas that are walled, what impact is that having? Is it funneling illegal immigrants and human smuggling through other areas, or is it still a place that has to be closely monitored?
No, walls work wherever they are, and it improves the conditions of safety and security in both sides of the border. There's an example that from my career. When I first started in San Diego, there was very little wall fencing at the time. And there are now neighborhoods right along the border that used to be places that agents really couldn't go because it was so active and so many smuggling attempts and all kinds of narcotics in this area. Those neighborhoods on the U.S. side of the border they have $1 million homes within them. They have shopping centers. They have safe neighborhoods and streets for their kids to play on. That didn't exist in 1985 when I started in the Border Patrol. On the Tijuana side of that same part of the border, it's also moved up the standard of living, the public safety, and the lifestyles that people can live, even though they're right next to the Mexico-U.S. border.
Are there still areas where the agents feel that they can't operate because of the dangers in the neighborhoods, the amount of civilians, the drugs, the gangs? Are there still places like that today within the United States?
I would say the physical challenges are mostly based on the geography and our ability to communicate. There are still places on the border where it's not communications from agent to base, agent to the dispatch center is not as reliable as we would like it to be as leadership. And then there are neighborhoods where people aren't big fans. But most of the people who live on the border that are not involved in smuggling, that are not, in the employ of the cartels, they know how valuable the Border Patrol is in their community as it relates to safety and security.
And I know we have to wrap up in a minute. You're a busy man, but what's the difference that you're seeing between the cooperation of the different states? The border goes from blue California, which you just mentioned, all the way through red Texas. Are different governors giving you different levels of cooperation, or does that impact you less in the federal control zones?
Yeah, on the line, it's not as evident as it might be in the interior, but what we're seeing, this is, again, the Trump effect, right? We have New York helping ICE arrest 25 Tren de Aragua gang members in New York City yesterday. So
wow. The
mayor leaned in a while back. The rest of the city helped yesterday. We have Gavin Newsom talking about turning over a murderer, somebody that was convicted of manslaughter and got a very light sentence in California. You have the governor of the state talking about how he's going to arrange and facilitate that individual being turned over to ICE. And so even blue states are getting the message that the American people want to feel safe in their own states, their own neighborhoods, and their own communities. And so the needle is definitely moving in the right direction. A lot to do. The Justice Department needs to take on this whole idea of sanctuary jurisdictions, but there's a lot of momentum coming in the right direction.
It's fascinating.